Nick Fuentes claims that he's America first, but his own words show that he despises what America actually stands for. Welcome back. This is going to be a one-topic, quick-hitter video today. I've got a lot going on, but I really wanted to sit down and talk about this. So, there is a golden rule on the internet. Wait for the context. So when Dinesh D'Souza accused Nick Fuentes of fascism based on a short clip, I didn't bite. I waited. Eventually, Nick's supporters released the full footage, claiming that it proved D'Souza wrong. But when you actually analyze the exonerating footage, it reveals something arguably even worse than fascism. It highlights a fundamental fracture in Nick Fuentes' worldview. He's arguing for two mutually exclusive realities at the exact same time. I'll show you both clips, starting with what Dinesh posted.
The problem with libertarianism is that liberty is not the highest political virtue. The highest political virtue is order. That is the greatest ordering principle. That is the greatest governing principle, order. Order comes first, liberty comes second, and order has to be maintained by a powerful state. Order has to be maintained by authority. And where does authority proceed from? Force, guns, overwhelming force, power that comes out of the end of a rifle, and legitimacy. The people have to believe in the authority of the state. And if these things are being undermined by freedom, by liberty, then you don't get liberty. And people like to say that Ben Franklin thing about liberty and safety, liberty and safety. It's about order and disorder. Forget about safety and liberty. So this is a very free country. This is one of the freest countries to ever exist. And the problem is that those things are starting to become undermined. The authority, the force and the legitimacy that founds the authority of the state, which holds the country together, which enforces the laws. And libertarians, they have a little bit too much faith in people and a little bit too much faith in the individual. I don't believe in the individual. And I'm individualistic, but I'm not an individualist. Individualism only makes sense in a white, Christian, patriarchal society.
Order, force, guns, scare the people into submission. That's the proper role of the state. And at the end of that clip, he says that he doesn't believe in the individual, that he is not an individualist. This is the statement that one of his followers decided to jump on and provide the full context for. This clip is a bit long, so bear with me here.
And I'm individualistic, but I'm not an individualist, because the world is not comprised of individuals. The world is comprised of families, men, women, and children. That is what society is comprised of. Individualism only makes sense in a white, Christian, patriarchal society, because when we're referring to individuals, we're referring to white Christian men. We're not even really thinking about women. We're not obviously thinking about children. We're not thinking about people with a 65 IQ. Individualism doesn't really work for them, because the individualist would say, we need individual rights. We have rights as solitary, single people, individual people. But, this has a very different meaning in the 17th century than it does in the 21st century. Because in the 17th century, it sort of went without saying that we're talking about all these individual white men that are Christian living on this fucking island. So it's like, yeah, me as an individual with my wife and my kids. Not every individual man, woman, and child. Like, you wouldn't say children have a right to vote. And back in those days, they wouldn't say that, even women should have all the rights that are enjoyed by a so-called individual, because they didn't have them. And that's because men and women are different, and they have different roles, and they're complementary. And so you're seeing the limits of that. We have a country that's filled with barbarians and radical, fanatical young people and feminist women. Individualism doesn't work. So, it's the same principle, patriarchy, hierarchy, structure. These things come first.
Hierarchy, structure. These things come first. Now, he also argues that liberty and freedom are only for white Christian men, but I'm not actually going to focus on that. I think people often focus on the specific claims too much and miss the larger, harmful worldview that is being pushed. And the larger claim he makes there is that the family is the building block of society. And look, he's absolutely right about that. That's not the harmful worldview. That is the correct way to see the world. The family is the building block of society. You could argue, and I even said in my last video, albeit in a very different context, that the individual is the building block of society, but really, it is the family. But here's the thing. He says that hierarchy and structure come first. But who sits at the top of his hierarchy? According to the clip that I just showed you, it's the white Christian male head of household. But in the first clip, he says that order is the most important thing for a government to have. Order, force, scaring the people into submission. So who is really at the top of his hierarchy? If you believe that the government should exhibit as much force as he says that they should, then the state is at the top of the hierarchy. And that's the harmful worldview that he pushes on his people. The top of the hierarchy in his mind is not the family, it's not the white Christian male, it's not the individual, it's the government. He may claim when he's asked that it's the family, but you cannot believe both, that order is the top priority for the federal government and that the family is the foundation of our society. So how do I know which one he actually believes? Because he told Tucker Carlson that he admires Stalin. It's why he's offered soft praise for Hitler in the past. It's because those dictators had what he believes is most important: order, control. But we have to be clear about this. Hitler and Stalin were not a part of Western civilization. They did all that they could to annihilate Western tradition. And in order to exhibit the sort of control that they had, the sort of control that Nick admires, you have to destroy family. Why? Because as Nick himself said, the family is the building block of society, the blocks that carry on Western civilization. And along with destroying the family, the state must destroy the higher power that should guide a proper family: God. And that brings us to the main point: the proper hierarchy of order. Nick claims that the state must exhibit as much control as possible. Order, force, guns, scaring people into submission. What that requires is a total inversion of the proper hierarchy of order. The proper hierarchy of order is essentially the Catholic idea of subsidiarity, which Nick should know about considering that he claims that he is a Catholic. So think about subsidiarity like a ladder of responsibility. At the top of the ladder, you have the most responsibility for yourself. One step down is your family. And as you go down each rung, the level of day-to-day responsibility gets smaller. Neighborhood, city, state, and finally the federal government at the very bottom. When it comes to the hierarchy of order, it's the same thing, but with God above everything. To live in a society with people with different views, you need a shared moral purpose, so God must be at the very top as a guiding light. Then you have the most responsibility for yourself, then your family, and as you move down, each level should have less direct order and control over your life, which means that the bottom, naturally, is the federal government. But Nick inverts this entirely. In his view, the state's role is at the top of the ladder, and to get there, the state has to replace God at that highest level. Don't get me wrong, I understand that in today's society, we increasingly try to put ourselves at the top of the ladder and be our own God, and that also leads to the death of society. Those are the radical individualists that Nick says that he is not. But putting the state at the top in place of God is arguably even worse than that. When a government exerts as much control as Nick is advocating for, it isn't just a big government. It has to become God. God can no longer be God. Because societies need a shared moral vision, a state with that much control can only survive if it replaces God with itself. The government must become God in the eyes of the people if it wants to survive. And it does this, in large part, by destroying the family. Once the state has that role, it can enforce whatever rules it wants on your family, no matter how harsh or how many people disagree. After all, if order and control are the most important functions of the government, then anything that stands between the state and that order, God, the individual, and yes, your family, has to give way. And we've seen this throughout relatively recent history. Think of the one-child policy in China. The state literally decided how many children your family was allowed to have. Think of the Soviet Union, where the regime used the probably fictional story of Pavlik Morozov, a boy who supposedly informed the secret police of his father's disloyalty to the nation, to teach that loyalty to the state comes before loyalty to your family. And then think of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, who separated children from their families and indoctrinated them to see their parents as enemies, with some children even then murdering their own family members. Hell, if Pol Pot weren't Asian, I'm sure that Nick Fuentes would list him as someone that he admires as well. Now, the bottom line is this. When you put the state at the top, you'll get the order that Nick Fuentes seeks. But the cost of that order is your children, your faith, you. That is the world that Nick Fuentes is asking for. A world where Western civilization is dismantled and replaced with top-down control. Because you cannot keep the West's idea of limited government, strong families, and a shared higher authority above the state, while also demanding the kind of total power that he wants the government to have. It's not pro-freedom, it's not conservatism, and it sure as hell is not America first. Thanks for sticking around and watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think about Nick Fuentes, about this whole order over freedom worldview, all of it. And hey, the college football playoff bracket is out. Tell me what you think about that too. I've got questions. How does the committee suddenly jump Miami over Notre Dame when they didn't play this past weekend? And how does BYU get punished for getting blown out, but Miami stays put after getting blown out and putting up negative rushing yards? It doesn't make sense to me, so let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.